The first memory that I have of my life, it's actually a sound, which is the sound of an AK-47 going off. I was at my grandparents' house for lunch with all of my family from my dad's side, and I was looking down the street, and all of a sudden I see this pack of people coming towards the open street, and the sound of an AK-47 come out. My dad is from the military, so his instincts were straight on, but I had no idea what was happening. And I remember as a child, I was 3 years old. I was playing with my cousins, and we had this thing where we would choose a color and we would count the cars that would be from that color and see who won at the end. And we were doing that when the invasion in Luanda came in. And I remember that at that day I chose the color black, and I looked down the building and I saw a car which I strongly believe to this day that it was the Batman car coming to save us all, because my mind was, something told me this is not good. And I remember coming in and my dad grabbing me, and we went to the toilet and we stayed there for a week. We were 25 people in a very small toilet, taking turns to eat and sleep outside the toilet. My grandmother would crawl to the kitchen to grab food. And we were very lucky because actually there was a few missiles that went into our own home. So if we were at home, I wouldn't be here today.
Adjany Costa is here today. And since then, she became a respected biologist, a great explorer, a defender of the Okavango River, a UN awarded champion of the earth, and the youngest minister of the history of Angola. But she was born in a country at war. You are listening to Wild Basil, the podcast that tells the stories of some heroes that are changing the narrative of a region. Contrary to the rest of the region, where the civil conflict ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall and with the end of the Cold War, in Angola, the violence didn't stop. The general elections held in 1992 ended up escalating the conflict as Savimbi, leader of UNITA, refused to recognize his defeat and increased the guerrilla warfare. Adjany remembers that time, which left indelible traces in her childhood memory. The conflict killed over 1 million people, caused more than 4 million to be internally displaced, and transformed Angola in the 7th most heavily mined country, just after Afghanistan. In the midst of all this, Adjany had one safe space.
When I was a child, because of the civil war, Luanda was isolated. There was no such thing as a country. There was Luanda, and there was the rest that was at war. And so we were pretty much isolated. We couldn't go anywhere. So there was not a possibility to actually travel around the country and see how beautiful it is. Angola was an unknown place for me. It didn't exist in my mind. My dad has traveled all around the country and has seen how beautiful the country is before I was even born. And so he made sure that he would take us to the best possible places to see nature and kind of connect to something beyond what the country was going through. So one of the things that he would do as a tradition, every Sunday we would go to the beach. So Luanda is in the coastline and we have fantastic beach. Some of them had mangroves, some of them were just open sea. And so every single Sunday he would take us to the beach and he would show us the small little animals and all of the life, kind of to connect us to something beyond the Civil War and something beyond all of the trauma that he has gone through for Civil War. And so that's how being in touch of nature became a part of who I am. It became part of my normality. It became a way to escape everything else, because on Sundays, nothing else existed. On Sundays, there was no terrible news. There was just nothing. There was just the ocean and life and my family, and that was it. And so we grew up with that sense of being part of nature and caring for nature and wanting to be next to nature to escape. The ocean was not a career. It was not a subject of study to me. It was part of my life. It was part of my sanity. It was part of who I am. And I never looked at it as, oh, I really want to study this, because my relationship with it was very intimate and deep.
Eventually, the ocean became for Adjany even more than that.
My bachelor was in biology. I did not choose that. My dad chose it for me, which is a very interesting twist of my life. I probably would not have chosen biology. So I entered biology, and the more I learned about it, the more I started looking at it in a different way without forgetting what it meant to me. So now I would see it in two different ways. The personal, intimate part of life that I belonged to, and the academia side of, this is very cool. But while doing my bachelor, there was no field work, again, because of all of the issues we had. We had mines in the roads, you couldn't get access to certain places, so I think we had 2 field works in the 5 years that I did university. It changed when I went for my thesis. I went to Portugal. I managed to get help to go to Portugal for 2 weeks to go to a lab and analyze sea turtle samples for my thesis. And the university was right at the ocean, and it had this incredible program in biodiversity and conservation. And I managed to link one and the other. So that is the point that I realized I wanted to do that for a living, that's the career I want to take beyond the books and beyond the personal life, that I'm very interested in how to protect this and how to understand how it works to better protect it.
And Angola has a long coastline and a large ocean to protect. More than 1,500 km, that, without counting with the northern enclave of Cabinda, stretch from the mouth of the Kunene River in the south to the mouth of the Congo River in the north.
I didn't think about conservation because I didn't know what conservation was. I didn't understand the role of protecting, because that was a completely foreign concept whatsoever that I only got grasps of much later in my career. The ocean and nature was personal. It was intimate. It wasn't about a lifestyle. It wasn't about I have to protect this. It wasn't about this is going to be my life. It was just a safe place to be. Until I went abroad and realized the concept of conservation and the importance of conservation. And I brought that concept back to my mindset and to my lifestyle. So I started feeling an alien after I realized the importance of conservation.
As a good alien, Adjany decided to become an explorer and to venture into unknown spaces.
So the first day that I became an explorer wasn't for a sanctuary, wasn't for a conservation trip, it was for anything like that. It was actually for work. So I started working when I was 20 years old, environmental consultancy. And as the youngest in the team and the one that didn't have my own family and didn't have a lot of responsibilities of my own, I was very free. So the company would send me to, the most remote places that they could, because there was no one else to send, basically. So I had the opportunity to experience Angola in a very different way. So they would send me away from Luanda, and I would be immersed in this immense forests, in this huge rivers, in this incredible landscape that to me was very foreign, because that's not the concept that I had of Angola. Angola to me was Luanda. Luanda was the ocean, and that was it. So I started becoming an explorer actually for work. The more work trips that I would do, the more I would insist with my employer to send me in more work trips, because I was just eager to getting to know all of these incredible places that most of the military would tell you about, because they had been there, they had hidden in these forests, they had used these rivers to run away. But so you would have a different prospect of nature in Angola because you would always associate it to war. While then I could be able to experience it in a very different light, in a very different way. Taking samples, collecting fish, whatever it was a very different way. So I actually started becoming an explorer through environmental consultancy because I was able to get away from Luanda and be able to engage in these incredible landscapes throughout the country that got me an insight of what Angola actually is and all of the potential that it has on the natural world. And in my mind, it clicked of what it meant to want to be curious and go out there.
Adjany's minds clicked, but an alarm also triggered.
So I was very tense throughout that first trip because I didn't know what to expect. I was told it was beautiful, but that was not in the top of my concerns. My top concerns were the mines and what if a wild animal would attack, or what if a traditional chief would like me and want me to become his bride. So I was very worried about a lot of different things, and I was very tense. And it was only until we got to the place, and it took us 2 days to get where we were supposed to go, that I started, from one side, relaxing, from the other, I was the only woman, and I was the youngest, I was the youngster, and so I was still very tense, but it managed to get me into a very different natural context. It wasn't a love at first sight moment because I was overwhelmed. I was very overwhelmed by everything around me. And it was more of an exploration. Can I go? I can't go there. Well, I see that tree and it's beautiful, but I can't walk to that tree because there are mines going to that tree. Or I want to go to the edge of the river, but I can't go to the edge of the river because there are crocodiles in it. Or I want to walk that way, but I can't really walk that way because there are lots of men that way. And, you know, that's not something I want to do by myself. So the first experiences were not the novel story like of, you know, I got there and it's gorgeous and I felt alive for the first time. Quite the opposite. They were very tense. So it took a while. It took something like a year or so to be able to actually enjoy, to be able to be in these places beyond the work, beyond the drama and the intensity, and be able to look at the small little things and actually identify myself with them.
Nature can be a safe place, full of wonders, but it can also be a scary place. And not only because of the wild. In Angola, it's also about the spirits.
That moment where I was actually able to enjoy, it was a province called Wij. And Wij is known in Angola as a place for witchcraft. And so everyone is very scared of going to Wij because, you know, you just don't know what is going to happen. But it was the first time that I got to go into a very dense forest with no pollution. So you would see the moss, you would see, you know, those fluffy floors. It's a very different forest than the ones that I was used to. I was used to the drier ones. It was also one of the first direct engagements that I did with local communities. So I was actually able to talk to them. I was able to share experiences. And I remember this guy saying, you know, we don't really do much about this forest because it's endless. It never ends. And that was the moment that I looked around and my mind was like, it actually looks endless. And that it sparked the curiosity of, you know, this is incredible and I'm in an incredible fairy tale place that I really should enjoy. And I started looking at the small things. Angola in general has an interesting economic history from pre-colonial times to colonial times to modern times. Modern Angola is based in oil and diamonds. You have a lot of other extractive industries, but oil and diamonds is what we're known for. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, up to this day, 98% of our GDP is still based in oil. So it's still a very important side of our economy and of our social dynamics. Most of the people that will go abroad or study in Angola, they will aspire to being in a career that is associated to oil, because employment will be slightly easier, pay will be slightly higher, and you're just kind of moving forward to development, which in Angola, development is linked to oil in everyone's minds. So our society is still very much based in oil and diamond mindsets, period. So I grew up in that mindset. I grew up, even though nature was an escape for me, but it was just that personally an escape for me. But my mindset was still on how important oil and diamonds were. And I've been in a lot of diamond mines, and I was just completely and absolutely devastated about the impacts and the effects of mining into the environment. You go to these incredible landscapes with these beautiful forests and rivers, and then you would get to the specific points of mining, and it's like you've entered the surface of Mars, because it was completely devastated. And to me, that was the first point into which realizing that though oil and diamond is very important for the economy, there had to be a counterbalance of some sort that was related to protection of nature. So the diamond mining was my first experience, and it was very traumatic, honestly, because it was horrible to watch. It was very horrible to watch. But other than that, I've had a lot of experiences offshores in oil platforms. And again, you can see all of that crude, you can see all of that, and you start hearing about all of the impacts of fossil fuels and all of it. But at the same time, you're looking at the whales, and you're looking at the jellyfish, and you're almost dragged by a shark, and you have all of these natural experiences associated to these very impactful activities, and you can start to connect one and the other. So my relationship to oil and mining goes beyond the economy, which is very uncommon in Angola. And so I have a very different perspective of it. And that's what shifted my interest completely to something completely different than oil and diamonds. So that's what it got me doing what I'm doing today. My experience with the Okavango is, if one would have to describe what destiny is, I think this is a good example, no matter how superstitious you are or not. My first encounter with the Okavango, I was 19 years old. So that was one of my first trips, and it was a terrible trip, I have to admit. It was a road trip that lasted 2 weeks. There were no tarred roads. We had some experts coming from Botswana, and my teachers chose one student to go with them, and they decided the crazy person would be me. So we went into roads that looked like craters. We got stuck car after car in deep sand, mixed with mud. We got stuck in rivers. It was horrible. It was draining. We didn't get to the place where we were supposed to get. It was just horrible. That was my first experience with the Okavango. And until then, every time someone would ask me about it, to me it was just this horrible, faraway place. It was an adventure, it was cool, but in the end, that was it. We did nothing, we saw nothing, we ended up with no results. So in 2015, so when I was 25 years old, I had just finished my master's, I had just returned home to Angola, and that's when I felt like an alien. That's when I felt, what am I doing with my life? What is this? I mean, I've learned all of these things, and I'm here in a country where all of these things are alien, are foreign. So I'm just going to live at my parents' house for the rest of my life and just go to the beach every day just to feel like, a normal, sane person. And one day I got a call asking me if I was crazy enough to join a team of people I've never met in my entire life to go to an area that is very mined, that is known in the country as the land of hunger, because it was one of the cores of civil war, where my dad had fought several times for years on end with a lot of bad memories. And I just said yes. Why not? I didn't ask questions. I just went there one day and I met all of the team, and that moment I realized, okay, I am the only woman and I'm the only Angolan in this team of men going in canoes downriver. This is going to be very interesting. And that is my second encounter with the Okavango that started all of this history that I have with it. I think the Okavango to me were lessons in all levels possible, personally, professionally, academia-wise, in all levels possible. I feel the Okavango made me Angolan because I was for the first time experiencing the raw Angola, the Angola that isn't shown in TVs, that people don't talk about because people don't know. I went to areas where they hadn't had visitors for 40 years, so we were the first ones to visit them, so it was a shock for them. I met Angolans that made me contest my concept of being Angolan and shifted my entire patriotic view of what being Angolan is. Because I was still in Luanda, I was still in that mean. It shifted completely what I saw as a potential for understanding what we have that can actually help us get to a position that is much beyond oil and diamond. I believed in Angola for the first time of my life. That expedition was actually the first time that I realized what being a woman is. It made me look at me being a person first, but then I realized the challenges that we have above men into environments like this, not just for our physiognomy, not just for our anatomy, but also for the concepts that we were raised to be and that other people look as to be and how to behave and how to see. That was the first time in my life that I had a shock into realizing how much more we actually have to overcome to get to the same point that some of our male counterparts. And I can start with the physiological and anatomical things of being a woman and how it hinders a lot of things and how we have to just be stronger to move forward with them. And just being very candid with our hormonal cycles in the field work are horrific. You have emotions and you have physical changes that you have to deal with beyond the physical exertion that you are doing every day. So as your male counterparts, you're pulling canoes, you are paddling 8 hours a day, you are eating the exact same thing, you are dealing with wild animals, you're exhausted all the time, but you have to do that within your hormonal cycle without being able to tell anyone, because the moment that you open up about that, then you are the woman, then you are the weak one, then you are the one that needs the break. Then don't push her too hard because she is a woman. Don't push her too hard because she woke up, in this way or that way. So whether we want it or not, the biology that follows us as women also plays a big role into what challenges we face. So that is number one. But also number two is you having to deal with the overall perception that you are the weakest one. With the overall, especially in such a physically demanding environment, that you are not as strong, and that's not just physically, but psychologically, that you are not able to do things because you are a woman. I can give you a few examples. When pulling canoes, when pulling mokoros, I wasn't allowed to pull mokoros in the first time that we would push mokoros. I wasn't allowed. And for them, that was the good thing to do, protect the woman because she's more fragile. And it took me a lot of tantrums to kind of show them, when I am tired, I will let you know. And it was hard to tell them, listen, just like you, it will come a day where I will not be able to pull these mokoros because I'm tired. Not because I'm a woman, because I'm tired. So it takes a lot of educating around you, but pulling in all of the strength that you have to not start yelling to everyone because they're treating you and patronizing you and in their mind trying to protect you because you're just not as strong as they are.
Adjany is younger. She's the youngest character of our podcast. And yet, she has already had at least 2 lives. After being born at war and being a survivor, she became an explorer, and then she moved to a radically different nature. Or did she?
My experience in coming out from a fieldwork person to a political world person, I describe it from the wilderness to the jungle. It's a very similar struggle, just in a very different context, honestly.
A Ministra da Cultura, Turismo e Ambiente, Adjany Costa,
tenho o privilégio de ter experiência de campo, portanto as políticas não serão só desenvolvidas para ficarem em papel, mas também...
I have never aspired to politics. Before coming into government, I used to brag about being politically ignorant. That is true. And yes, it was a shock. I wasn't even in Angola. It was during COVID times, which made it even more challenging. Age, gender, and lack of experience, which is usually attached to my age, because people look at me and they think I don't have any experience in life, were the biggest challenge, obviously. So right before my nomination, I had just won the United Nations Young Champions of the World Awards, which got a lot of attention. And right after that, I got the Golden Medal for Civil Merit. So I was decorated by the president. And that's when it started. That is when my direct interaction started.
After almost 37 years in power, José dos Santos, at 73, was replaced by a new leader, João Lourenço. In spite of having been a long-term member of the MPLA, dos Santos Party, and the country's Minister of Defense when he took power at the end of 2017, João Lourenço started to push more changes than what was expected.
When the new president came into play, there's a lot of shifts that started happening, and one of them is the opening up of Angola. Angola was a very closed country. Oil, diamonds, our history, and that is it. While opening up the country, then we started having the influence of these other concepts that were once foreign, like conservation. We did have national parks and conservation areas, but conservation wasn't a priority. Nature wasn't a priority. It was a consequence. And with these new dynamics, it came in the importance of landscape, the importance of the nature, especially with the economic dropout that we had, the economic recession that was associated to the crash of oil prices. It brought in this prospect that there's a lot more beyond oil. Angola has a lot more potential, and that potential is mostly in the natural world. So that was the shift that happens in terms of leadership. And that's when the president decided to make this whole change to try to move things into a different direction that they have been for the past decades ever since independence. And that's where I come into play. That's where my name is brought into the list. And so that's where I get nominated as the new Minister of Culture, Tourism and Environment.
Just 30 years old, Adjany was the head of a newly created ministry of a country twice the size of Texas. Not a small challenge.
One of my main approaches was not exactly to create new things. It was use things that already exist and teams that already exist and shift slightly and incorporate concepts that are slightly new or that were not known, or people didn't see it as leverage. Again, always using the economy as a backup because all of these actions have an impact in economy and everyone listens to economy. So you're using economy for people to listen to you. And one of the things that I found going into the ministry is that there is a lot already done. It's just the language and the approach to which they're launched into the world is not exactly applicable. So my goal was to make policies applicable. It wasn't to create new things, because most of them existed, believe it or not. Climate change strategy already existed. Blue economy was already in the Ministry of Finance's plate. The shift into conservation policies, into a more community cored approaches already existed. Circular economy, the concept already existed. Is on how do you frame it in a way that is applicable. So we started the dialogue around climate change. We started the dialogue around shifting the thought on everything is going to be the same for the rest of our lives, and we're going to have oil for the rest of our lives. So that was the goal. In environment, everything that is nature-based takes a long time, especially in a society that is used to ways that are not exactly sustainable. So you have to shift the whole mindset. You have to shift entire policies. You have to shift politics. You have to shift people in general to achieve that change. And sustainability is hard to obtain. And once you get used to that money-making machine, that fast money-making machine, it's very difficult to shift your way. And I think that's what happened. That associated to the fact that for decades, Angolans were fixed on how do we survive today. So we're not trained, I'm going to use the word trained for a lack of a better word, we're not used to thinking long-term. We're not used to thinking about consequences of things we do today in 20 years, because you don't know if you're going to have 20 years. It's very unlikely that you're going to have 20 years. You're concerned on what do I have at the end of the day? So that was the mindset at the time. And that was a spread thought. It was people in the elite, it was people in the fields as well, because they didn't know if they were going to survive until the next day. So accumulating is still a cultural thing, because only now we are starting to understand the importance of sustainable long planning, because we are now living the consequences of that lack of long planning then. But then it was impossible to know. So I think that's what happened after the first years of independence. We're now free. What can you do now?
But Adjany is not giving up. She's finding a different way to change Angola.
So I didn't resign. What happened was I was first brought in to reshape an institution. So it took us 6 months to have an institution with a slightly different vision that was integrating all of these sectors in once, reshaping. Using what are the priorities? We can't do everything at the same time. What are our priorities? How to reshape things? And after these 6 months, the boss realized I'm not a politician. And I'm not a politician. And one of the reasons why I was able to carry through such a shift is because I'm not a politician. And that's when I got shifted from a political role to a more advisory and technical role. That's when he pulled me to get closer to him, because I was just much more effective as being pragmatic and helping point out where the problem is, instead of being the face of, pretending everything is okay, which is what a lot of politicians have to do. It's part of the job. You have to reassure people. You have to be the face that tells people we're working on it, right? But I'm not the person to tell you. I'm the person to go there and do it.
Wild Basil, a podcast produced by Mova. Written by Luis Guimarães Scherer Navarro and Martin Kennen. Music by Carson Mukavelli. Historical Advisor Stephanie Erdang. Scientific Advisor Ghislain Ribes. Recording Carson Studio Maputo. Directed by Martin Kennen. funded by AFD. Find us on movamos.co.mz.